Hello guys, welcome back to Audible Odyssey. So let's step into a world of immersive storytelling where gripping tales of mystery, horror and adventure come to life. Each narration is crafted to pull you into the heart of the story, creating an unforgettable audio experience. From spine-tingling horrors to timeless classics, Audible Odyssey Adventures is your gateway to thrilling journeys beyond imagination. Subscribe now, and let the stories take you to places you've never dreamed of. Audible Odyssey presents. I want to tell you about one of the most horrible nights of my life. Dark nights alone can be scary and intimidating for women like me at the best of times, but I don't wish to experience a night like that again for as long as I live. Let me tell you my story. It was a night like any other really. It was Friday and I'd finished work at around 600. Afterwards, I went for a quick drink and a chat with my two best friends, Jan and Frida, before heading home. The Red Line pub was buzzing as it always was on a Friday evening. We could hardly move in there or hear each other through the rowdy crowd. I only had one drink, a refreshing white wine spritzer. I couldn't drink too much as I'd be driving the tedious hour and a bit journey home to my little country haven. Tucked away in a quaint rural village in the heart of England's green and pleasant land. I didn't really mind the journey. It was only 3 days a week in the office. After all, it was far better to have peace and greenery surrounding me rather than living in a busy concrete jungle in town. After a great chat, I said farewell to my besties with a three-way hug and wished each other a good weekend before we headed off in different directions, then towards the train station and me to my silver dream machine parked in the office car park. I sat my bag down on the passenger seat, slipped off my jacket and threw it in the back seat. I found it too restrictive to drive in and preferred to crank up the heat. I checked my phone while the car was warming up for a few minutes before I left. I sent a text to my darling fiancé. Dave, I call him Dave the Rave. It was a bit of an ironic nickname as he was miserable and too serious most of the time, but I loved him dearly. I said, I'm on my way home now. I can't wait to see you. What's for dinner? He soon replied, too tired to cook tonight. We'll order something in when you get here. Drive safe. I love you. He left 3 X's or kisses at the end like he always did. I turned the radio on to my favorite station, a hearty mix of music and DJ banter to help me along the way as I set off on the drive. I love to sing along to any songs that I know and use the steering wheel as a drum kit. Anyone looking in through the window would think I'm crazy, but to hell with it. It's my space and I'll do what makes me happy. It's a bit awkward if I'm stuck at a red traffic light and I catch someone looking. I just smiled my biggest grin back at them and carried on. So there I am trundling along through the heavy traffic heading for the highway, dealing with the usual number of idiots who have not bothered to indicate what has become like water off a duck back to me. Now I just shout more on at them to make me feel better. I know they can't hear me over my music. Besides, I don't want to be the center of a road rage incident. After just over an hour I reached my junction and turn off my eyes. Adjusting from the bright glare of the motorway to the semi-darkness of the long and winding country roads that lead me home, the moon shone brightly tonight through the passing clouds, which helped light the way. I tend to drive quite slowly on these roads as foxes and deer can run out at a moment's notice. I'm an animal lover, so I don't know what I'd do if I ever did them any harm. Now I'm about 20 minutes or so from home and the roads have become narrower and darker. Wait, what was that? I thought I heard something screeching, so I turned the music off and carried on, hoping to hear more clearly. I glanced in the rearview mirror and thought I saw something rather large dart across the road, a stag maybe. I thought and shrugged it off. However, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Now I felt quite spooked, but never mind, I'll be home soon. I told myself I would pick up the pace a bit as I kept glancing in the mirror with my eyes increasingly drawn to the mirror. I felt a huge with my attention diverted. I'd hit one of the huge potholes that were all over these roads. They weren't well maintained. Oh no, please don't give me a puncture, not now, not tonight, not here. I prayed that I could get home safely. I groped in my bag for my phone to call Dave. I know I shouldn't have done, but it was very unlikely another car would be coming along in these remote areas. Dave answered quickly, asking if I was okay. I blurted out that I felt spooked for some reason, to which he laughed out loud and made silly ghost noises on the phone. He told me I was just being stupid. I then let him know that I'd hit a pothole. He replied, "Just put the phone away and just get home. I'll put the kettle on and I'll make you a cup of tea." I threw the phone on the passenger seat towards my bag, but it missed and ended up in the footwear. Carrying on, I heard the noise again, only this time it was louder, more low, pitched like a growl or a howl, long and drawn out. I tried to rationalize my thoughts and told myself to calm down. Perhaps it's deer mating or something, is it rutting season? But then I saw something out of the corner of my eye to the right of me behind the trees. I didn't see it clearly, but it was large. No doubt about that, it seemed to be running alongside my car parallel to the road. My heart was thumping out of my chest by this point and tears were running down my face. I was absolutely terrified. I was trying desperately to see what it was and very nearly missed the sharp turn in the road. I could see it had gotten ahead of me because I could now see it from in front. It wasn't just big, it was huge. I was so close to home now, so close to safety. I put my foot down. "Please let me get home," I screamed at myself. Then right in front of me it was the biggest leap across the road and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was frozen in my seat in terror. Whatever this thing was. It stood around 9 foot tall at least, with a huge hairy muscular build, pointy ears and a face shaped like a dog. It was there in front of me in the middle of the road. I swerved past it at God knows what speed. Its big yellow eyes flashed in my headlights as I passed and it was sprinting to catch up to me. I could see it in the rearview mirror slowly catching up to me. Now directly behind me. I sped up even more, but it somehow managed to keep pace with me. I couldn't believe it, desperate to get away. I accelerated to the brink of what the engine could handle and the beast began to disappear from view. Finally, after what seemed much longer than usual, I saw the familiar lights of my driveway. I screeched to a stop, skidding on the pebbles, and nearly crashed into the house. Upon hearing the noise of me skidding onto the driveway, Dave dashed out of the front door. I hurtled out of the car, leaving the door open, and didn't even bother to grab my purse or my phone, which fell to the ground from my lap, to get in. I shouted at Dave at the top of my voice as I bundled the pair of us through the door, slamming it shut behind us. What on earth was going on? He shouted. He picked me up from the floor where I was lying in the quivering heat, my legs refusing to work, covered in tears and sweat. "What on earth happened?" he asked. As he said this, he went to go outside to close the car door and to retrieve my bag and coat. "No, don't go out, it's there, I screamed. "What's there? What is it? Just stop it." He said I should let him go outside. Instead I cued my hands to block out the light and looked through the window. The sensor light outside had gone dark. I couldn't see anything at all. "Okay," Dave said, "now calm down and tell me what's going on." He held me tight and grabbed a tissue to wipe my tears. I broke free to run to the patio doors to make sure they were locked and then to the kitchen to do the same. I was too nervous to even sit down and tried to catch my breath to tell him what I'd encountered. Before I could tell him, he interrupted, grinning at me, "You were spooked by a deer and you've let your imagination get the better of you. I'll get you a cup of tea, you can have a nice shower, and I'll get us some food. I'm starving." I pleaded. "No, listen to me. I know what I saw and don't you dare open the door." He looked at me and sighed, "Look, you've left the car door open." He continued, "You're not being logical." I knew he was far too sensible to believe me, although he could clearly see what a mess I was in, but I needed to tell him straight. It came out in a burst of words. "I've seen a werewolf and it's out there." He laughed out loud and looked at me in a pitiful way. "Oh dear," he said, "now I know you're being stupid," half laughing. He went to put his arms around me, but before he could do so there was an almighty crashing sound outside. I jumped up and we ran to the window. "What the hell was that?" he exclaimed. The sensor light had come on, but we could see nothing out there except that half of the fence had been flattened. Then there it was again, that god-awful bellowing, growling, guttural screech. He looked at me as if he was trying to make sense of what he and I both clearly heard there. "I told you," I said. "I'm calling the police," Dave said, as he grabbed his phone from his pocket. "There's some idiots out there playing silly jokes." We went back to the window to look outside, but the lights had gone off. Thankfully, he managed to get through, after what seemed like an age for someone to answer. He explained what had happened in an elevated tone. They said they were going to send a patrol car along to have a look around, but it may be some time as they were short-staffed due to sickness. I couldn't believe our luck, not that their presence was going to help much. Anyway, Dave went into macho mode and headed for the door. I pleaded with him to stay inside, but he completely ignored me and opened the door. The sensor light went on, and there, over by the trees just adjacent to the driveway, he saw it in all its glory. His face turned white as a sheet as all the blood drained from it. He slammed the door and turned to the now cringing, shaking mess that was me. "I don't know what the hell that thing was, but we needed to get out of here with that." The same awful guts-wrenching howling filled the air, and there was a crescendo of trees and bushes breaking. He looked out of the window and beckoned for me to get back. The light came back on. "Jesus Christ," he shouted as the terrifying creature was revealed again. It was stalking around, almost like it was playing with us. I peeped out as it stooped down to sniff around inside the open car door, and then in a swift motion tipped the car on its side as if it were nothing. It turned towards the house, its huge yellow eyes burning through me. It had seen me. We both ran upstairs to the bathroom and locked ourselves in, holding on to each other in abject terror. Just then, the phone in Dave's pocket rang. It was a police officer saying he was outside the house and asking what on earth had happened to the car in the driveway. We ran downstairs, almost too scared to open the front door. Looking out first through the window, we saw a police car and two officers with flashlight. We hurriedly opened the door to let them in. "Did you see it?" I blurted out. "Out to see what madam was." The officer replied, "May we come in?" I shut the door quickly as they stepped inside. I started crying and Dave sat me down on the sofa. The policeman got his notebook and pencil out and asked us to explain what had happened. "Do you know the people who did this to the car?" he said. Dave looked at me and then towards the two policemen. "Well," he said, "it's not anyone human. That's for sure. I'm almost too embarrassed to say, but there's a massive creature outside, at least 8 or 9 foot tall." With that, the two officers asked if we would mind if they took a look around outside and headed towards the door. "This thing, whatever it is, did that to the car. It's incredibly strong." "Be careful," I said. The two officers looked at each other and almost laughed as they took out their flashlights and left through the door, which we closed behind them. They obviously thought we were crazy, but then as they shone the flashlight into the garden at the side of the driveway, they must have caught a glimpse of something. In a burst of movement they ran towards the trees. "We can't just let them be attacked by that thing," I screamed. We heard the now familiar gut howling cut through the air. As Dave opened the door slightly to check what was happening, he could see beams of light moving fast among the trees. As the policeman gave chase, he quickly shut the door and we huddled together on the floor waiting for hopefully positive news. It seemed like forever before we heard a frantic knocking at the door. It was one of the officers, but out of breath and bedraggled. "Is Sam back here?" he panted. Trying to catch his breath, Dave replied, "Let me get you some water." The crazed officer gulped the water down and in a low voice he said, "That's not human. There must be a bear on the loose. I've never seen anything that big in these parts. I hope Sam got away." He called for backup over the radio, announcing that he thought there's a wild animal on the loose with his colleague in pursuit. After a minute or two, the officer assured us that help was on the way and that we needed to stay inside. "Are you sure you want to go back, out there?" Dave exclaimed. "I know it sounds ridiculous, but it looked like a werewolf." It really did. The police officer looked at us with disdain. "I know it was a very, very large animal, but werewolves don't exist. Sir, you and your partner need to stay calm and let us handle it. I'm sure we'll catch this creature soon. There's a zoo not too far from here and I shouldn't be telling you this, but they've had a few animals disappear lately. Bears can stand on their hind legs. You know." With that he gathered himself to go back out. Donning his flashlight and armed only with his taser and back on, he turned back towards us quickly when my colleagues arrived to tell them, "I've gone to look for Sam. Whatever happens, stay inside, this thing is dangerous." Dave and I stared at each other as if to doubt what we'd witnessed when all of a sudden we heard the terrified cries from the police officer. He was banging and shouting at the door, begging for us to open it. As we opened the door he fell through it, falling at our feet. He looked absolutely terrified. "It's Sam," he cried, "it's Sam." He radioed back to headquarters and offices down. "I need armed units and dogs to be sent to my location immediately. I believe there's a very large animal on the loose." The blood drained from my face as I questioned the officer as to what had happened. "He's beyond help," he replied, almost crying. "There were pieces of him everywhere. He's been ripped to shreds." The officer was obviously in severe shock at what he'd seen. I tried to comfort him as Dave wrapped a blanket around him and grabbed him a shot of whiskey as the poor officer sipped from the glass with trembling hands. A fierce growling filled the air. Yet again this was cut through by the increasing sound of a police helicopter overhead. "Thank God," I thought. We looked out and saw a searchlight beaming down from the helicopter and the sound of sirens in the distance. I felt a surge of hope, but the officer just sat there on the floor staring into space. He suddenly whispered, "I think I saw it. I can't believe it. A werewolf, just like from the horror movies." Giant yellow eyes staring at me. There was even a severed arm hanging from its jaws. He stared at me directly in the eyes with incredible helplessness. "No one will believe me." The banging on the door made us all jump in fright. Here were the police that were called us back up. As I opened the door and looked outside, it was chaos. There were countless police cars outside with flashing blue lights all along the winding country lane leading to our house. The sight of armed police sent shivers right through me as the shocked officer tried to explain what had happened. Paramedics had also arrived at the scene and I ushered them towards the bemused officer. "I think he's in shock," I said. I could hear sniff pits of speech from outside as the numerous officers communicated via radio. "Remains of an officer" was one snippet I heard. "Highly dangerous" was another. "Forensics was needed straight away." As I looked over at the darkness of the woods, I could see a mass of flashlights scouring the area and the sound of the police dogs barking startled me. "This must be a nightmare," I whispered, as my tears fell onto the sleeve of Dave's sweater. The search through the woods went on until daybreak. The entire area had been cordoned off and all roads in the immediate area were closed. It was reported on the traffic news as an incident with no other details. I could see a forensics center being erected around what I assume was the stricken policeman. I felt terrible for his family. He seemed so young. He could have been any older than 30. I hoped he didn't have children in the cold light of day. I could see my overturned car in the driveway. It was a crumpled mess with my belongings from inside strewn all over the floor. I was told not to touch anything as it was a crime scene. Although I dearly wanted to find my purse and my phone, a parade of detectives arrived to take statements from us. I told them straight that it was a werewolf that was responsible, although I glanced down as they were taking notes and they wrote large animal instead. They clearly thought I was utterly insane, but my partner backed up my story. We both spent the morning making tea and refreshments for the all too many police and forensics teams who trundled in and out of the house as I decompressed. I gathered some of my things and packed them into a suitcase. There was no way I was willing to stay here tonight, and I wasn't even sure that I could stay here ever again. As evening neared, most of the initial commotion had died down, although the forensic tent remained in the woods and police helicopters were still wired overhead as they had all day. I'd kind of blotted out the sound of them. I could also see police marksmen dotted around outside. I'd heard that the other residents nearby had been evacuated and might not be allowed back tonight. There was clearly still concern that whatever this thing was still out there. I asked the remaining detective, a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper head of hair and rather dashing good looks, if he and his colleagues had found an explanation as to what had happened out there. He said he couldn't go into details, but they believed it to be a wild animal attack. They thought maybe a big cat had escaped from a zoo or sanctuary, possibly a bear, going by our description, but we should know more soon. Dave and I looked at each other incredulously. There was no way that a big cat could have flipped my car like that. I asked if we'd be allowed to leave as I wasn't comfortable staying there. Yes, of course, he replied. I don't think we need you here, but we'll need to know where you'll be staying in case we need to speak to you. It'll help our investigations though if we could use your house as a base of operations for the short term. I was just glad to get out of there, so we left the keys with a detective with no hesitation. Thank you, he said. We'll return your keys in a few days, once it's safe for you to return the detective phone for a police car to escort us to where we were going. My mother's house would be a good place for us to recoup and get our heads together for a while. She lived in a nearby town. It wasn't very big, but it was in a crowded area which suited me just fine. I didn't want to be alone anytime soon. And so we left the house that day. I looked back at the devastation as we left. I still couldn't quite believe it. That fateful night was 2 months ago. Now there haven't been any further reports of attacks or animal sightings. The police have been very quiet. It was reported in the newspapers that the stricken officer had been the victim of an animal attack and that investigations were still underway, but they didn't suspect any further danger to the public, anything to keep them happy, I suppose, and life went on. We put the house up for sale as soon as we could. Damned if I ever wanted to stay there anymore. Also, I'm sure that one of the neighbors isn't normal. We're still living with my mother at the moment. It's not perfect, but at least it's safe. Something strange that I do notice, though, I keep all of the lights off and sit in silence now whenever it's a full moon. Maybe it's my imagination, but on those nights I can still hear a faint howling in the distance, drowned out by the noise of the town. I work from home whenever it's a full moon and now just to be safe. So guys, the video has ended now. If you like our stories and want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to Audible Odyssey channel and do all these things: like, comment, share, and subscribe. Enjoy horror and adventure stories like this. So just subscribe to Audible Odyssey. Bye bye.